Okay, we're recording now. And so this session is on homelessness, and we're very honored to have Marc Alexander be our speaker. Marc is the Director of Office of Housing for the City and County of Honolulu, appointed by Mayor Caldwell. And prior to that, he served at the Hawaii Community Foundation, the Institute of Human Services, and was the first Hawaii State Governor's Coordinator on Homelessness. So here to give us a whole big picture of what's happening with homelessness in Hawaii and Honolulu is Marc Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you to all of the Rotarians that are able to join today. I want to begin with a shout out to Rotary because in one of our new facilities and programs, which I'll talk about in a little while, the Ka'ahi facility, or what's also known as the Temporary Quarantine and Isolation Center, 4 Rotary clubs, I think, worked with IHS. Kathleen Merriam was leading the charge, and we're able to put together 26 entertainment really kits for that center, which has been really great because right now about 30 people have gone through that. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that's important as we move through this presentation. So I want to spend about maybe roughly 40 minutes on this presentation, and then open it up really for more questions. Hopefully I can keep it a little bit shorter than that. Actually, I should make sure I get a clock near me. Could I have my phone, please? Okay. Otherwise, you know, I might go too long. So the title of this presentation is Addressing Homelessness in Light of COVID-19. This is not a typical time period for any of us. I don't think any of us have been through a pandemic. And even on something like homelessness, which really only affects a very, very small portion of our population. So say if we use, you know, we have around 980,000 people here on Oahu, 1.4 million statewide. You know, on any given day, we have maybe, you know, on Oahu, around 4,400 people that are homeless, that are actually homeless. We know the number's actually going to be higher than that, but it's a small percentage of the population. Yet it's a very, very vulnerable portion of the population, both for themselves getting sick, as well as the possibility of them passing on disease and illness to the larger community. And so that's why from the get-go, we really wanted to make sure that we addressed homelessness in light of COVID-19 in a very strategic and intentional way. So I'm gonna see if I can, okay, here we go. So what we did is we put together early on in March an overall plan specifically around homelessness and COVID-19. Just to give an idea of why this is important, as of a couple weeks ago in Seattle, King County, they had 115 homeless people diagnosed with COVID-19. 2 had already died. San Francisco has had scores of homeless people diagnosed, tested, and tested positive for COVID-19. And the concern is, again, their health and safety and that of preventing community spread. So for us, we had 2 major goals in mind. Number 1 is maintain the health and safety of the community and to prevent community spread. That was the biggest thing. We needed to make sure we kept everyone in the community safe. The homeless population is part of that population, and we did not want it to spread. Now, I'm happy to report, but I always hesitate to say this, that as of today on Oahu, we have tested hundreds. One hospital system alone, just as of a few days ago, had tested over 600 people, 400 unique clients in the homeless community, and none, they had been screened and tested. Certain, not all of them were swabbed, right? Because you do the screening and then you do the testing. So 50 were actually swabbed, but none have turned out positive. And of the 30 clients that have gone through our Ka'ahi facility, which I'll talk more about again later, none has been identified as positive. Maui's had 1 homeless person because of the hotspot that they had, you know, on Maui. But we are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. And I really want to emphasize that. And then the other major goal is we want to prevent an increase in homelessness too. And this is something we're keeping in mind, and we're already at the city doing a larger scale planning around how we can prevent homelessness on the more positive side to help support the right now getting close to 300,000 of our population, that's filed for unemployment. It's a huge concern. So this is always in the background as well. So what is our strategy? Well, the strategy is basically 5 prongs. And I'll talk about each of these briefly and give concrete examples of how we're addressing them. The first one is to support expanded hygiene and sanitation resources. The Center for Disease Control, they were very clear, the CDC guidance, that we really needed to make sure we had proper hygiene and sanitation resources in place. So many of you already know about our Punavai Rest Stop, which we opened now, over a year ago in Ivalai, and it's basically a rest stop on steroids. Washing machines, dryers, a place for pets, a debugging machine, showers, bathrooms. We expanded its hours. It was 7 to 7. We made it 7 to 11 p.m. And then as of yesterday, it became a 24/7 operation. And it serves anyone and everyone, anyone who needs help. It's free of charge. That's number one. Number two is we utilized our mobile hygiene trailers. There are 2 on island that are on various kinds of contracts. Hiei Project Vision, they've been a great partner with us. They helped us out at our HONU site. That's the Homeless Outreach and Navigation to Unsheltered Persons program, which then turned into the POST program, which I'll talk more about later. And they also have been going to other areas when we've had some emergency situations. And the other one is a city-funded one called Revive and Refresh. And again, they've been very helpful. Like we lost water in Waimanalo, there was a large encampment, and with a few hour notice, they were able to, get people over there to provide showers and toilets for that, homeless encampment. So this is important. Now, early on, we had, closed our parks, and that included the comfort stations. But then we were able to make some adjustments, and we reopened all of the standalone comfort stations within a few days. So that was very helpful, and that really brought online. Remember, we have around 220 comfort stations. So the vast majority of our comfort stations, that's a nice way of saying toilets, right? Many of which have showers, they were brought online. And the reality is that many of our homeless encampments are near areas that have comfort stations and showers. And so bringing those online was really helpful. We did not try to provide in those soap and other kinds of hygiene materials because they were stolen. Toilet paper was stolen. So instead we worked with community groups and providers to provide basically a camping approach, little hygiene packets that contain toilet paper, hand sanitizer, soap, and things of that type, so that they would have what they needed wherever they would be. It was also important to open up, the hygiene areas because some of our workers, like our bus drivers, they would stop at our park comfort stations, as well as other members in the community. Now we've opened up the parks again for exercise, and so more of the comfort stations are pretty much open. But what we also did is we never had, except for one, Kuhio Beach Park had a 24-hour comfort station. That was a public-private partnership. So then we added to it. So we have a 24/7 comfort stations at the Waianae Boat Harbor near the tennis courts, as well as the Waimanalo Beach Park, primarily because we have some large encampments there. They're also on other ends of the island, not in the urban core. And then also we were able to work with community groups there to have those kind of taken care of and maintained. We're also opening up Ala Park, but the community group actually asked us not to make that 24/7 because of concerns around, vandalism and that, which is a real challenge for us with our parks. And by the way, most of the vandalism isn't by homeless persons, it's by gangs. And that comes from HPD. But it was really important to expand and support these hygiene and sanitation resources because obviously hand washing is really critical. Now we've been able to bring masks out to homeless people in outdoor settings. And also we've been trying to get many of them to practice physical distancing. I'll talk more about what we do when people don't want to comply with that request. but many of them have. And I think that's been very, very helpful. So that's our first strategy. Basically, keep people clean. Just make that available and make it possible for people to do what most of them know they should do and want to do, in fact. Number one. Number two is we needed to address the resource needs of providers and city staff in a timely manner. Communication is always a challenge in the city and county. It still is a challenge, maybe even more so. I mean, even for us to do our conference calls, most of our managers don't have computers with cameras. But you know, what we need to do is do everything we can to communicate and listen to the providers and those in the community. And so we work very, very closely, for example, with our state partners, especially in the Department of Health. And I'll give you some concrete examples about that shortly. And we work with the providers. So for example, one of the teams that we have at the city is one called the Homelessness Working Group. And I co-chair that with Laura Thielen, not the Senator Laura Thielen, but the one who's the executive director for Partners in Care. So we co-chair that. And it's a small group. We have someone, you know, the deputy director from Department of Health, you know, is on the phone with us. We have selected, you know, other support people from various agencies in the city, DCS, Department of Community Services, so that we can make decisions and we can address the problems that people raise. So if they ask us a question, we find the answer if we don't have the answer. And that group has been very helpful for also spreading the information that's important to people, but also important to tell us what we need to hear and have those difficult conversations. Like one of the questions that we had, we only recently were finally able to get an answer from the state, was what do you do if someone who's homeless, unsheltered, presents for COVID symptoms, but refuses to be tested? Very important question. And we found out, bottom line is, we can't make anyone get tested. We can only quarantine someone, but you have to have an abundance of data that shows that person is likely to have been exposed. The only way of getting someone tested is without their consent is through civil commitment. So questions like that are very, our providers think are very practical, need an answer. And so we try to dog that so that we can get an answer. And we have other ones like that. So that's number two, to make sure everything is coordinated. The Department of Emergency Management at the city is the main hub. Everything goes through them. So if I have a question I want to ask the AG, the Attorney General, I don't call them up myself. I go through our EOC so they know what's going on and they can track it. And that's really important that we follow that protocol, not because it's an authority or power thing. It's simply so we know what's going on because there's so many moving pieces. That's number two. Number three strategy is to provide quarantine isolation facilities for those unable to self-quarantine. Now, the particular focus here is going to be on the homeless population, but initially we were concerned about anyone who might need quarantine and isolation. Now, what's the difference? Quarantine technically means that someone has been, in the way we use it, has been tested and is waiting for a test result. Not everyone is generally tested. They're screened first, because if you test someone too soon, the test will give them false confidence. It might come out negative. And the best example is one of our medical personnel use this example, so I hope you don't mind me using this example. You know, if someone has sex and tests for pregnancy the next day, it's not going to be very helpful. You have to wait a certain time. And so it is with this disease, with COVID-19, with this virus. You have an incubation period. And so that's why it's very important to screen with someone who knows what they're doing. And then if certain conditions present, you can go ahead and test. Now, there is also surveillance testing, and that has a role and function. But our first purpose here was, if we had to test someone, once you test them, they should be in quarantine, because otherwise they could unknowingly spread it, but they could also unknowingly be a recipient of the virus. And so we created this site. And then isolation means when someone has been confirmed to be COVID positive, and then they have to, be isolated from others. So Mayor Caldwell early on in mid-March offered one of our facilities, this Ka'ahi facility, which is slated to be used by the Sand Island Drug Treatment Organization. And so it has, the reason why we acquired it was so that we can expand and make sure that drug treatment program stays in place. But they're okay where they are right now. And then we were able then to use this facility temporarily. Now, we as the city, we don't do public health. We don't have a health department, unlike many major municipalities on the continent. So that's a state responsibility. So we partnered from the get-go with the State Department of Health. And fortunately, Eddie Mercereau, many of you know, I mean, Kathleen, that's your shop, Department of Health, right? Eddie Mercereau, Deputy Director there, took on the lead from DOH on that, working with other organizations such as IHS, H4, H3RC. Because, you know, in our state, in our community, no one of us has all the answers or resources. We gotta work together. And so we were able to do that to create, and we were like the first ones in the country that had a dedicated facility for homeless persons. And part of that, we did that because, you know, unfortunately there's stigma attached to homeless persons, but it's also, we wanted a place where we could really help people, bring them the mental health services that they need. And so what happens is, and we can do testing on site, but that's not the primary purpose. So many providers in the community have done a great job bringing testing on, so we've been able to depend on them. But when they test someone who's homeless, who doesn't have a place to self-quarantine while awaiting results, they can come to Ka'ahi. We provide the transportation. DOH has worked that out, you know, with proper, you know, personal protective equipment, all that type of stuff has been worked out. Then they come in, and what they do there, and H3RC has been awesome in doing this, is they assess people. And so while they're in there for a few days, you know, because it takes a while, at least it used to take a lot longer to get the test results, but while they're in there, they stabilize them. So they've been detoxing people. And those who work in this field, you know, if you do an alcohol detox, you need medical supervision. It can be very dangerous. So they do that, they assess them. And so after people get their results from COVID-19, most of these people, only like 2 or 3 at this time, have not gone on to shelter or other services, including detox or substance use disorder treatment. So it's been an awesome proof of what we call stabilization, the proof of concept around stabilization beds. So we use the opportunity where they're in a nice, safe place, being fed and taken care of, to go ahead and address some of their other needs. And again, it's a community effort. If we didn't have the support of, you know, IHS and H4 and H3RC, Department of Health, we could not be doing that. Again, the city provided the building, but without these services, it's just a building. And so that's been very, very successful. And again, I'm going to show you a little bit more about these. The fourth strategy was expand shelter capacity. We actually addressed this early on. One of the big issues in our shelters is congregate shelters. Those are where you have bunches of people together, like dormitory style on a mat. And we have some large ones like that. And that's where there's been an issue with spread on the continent. And so right away, we did decompression of these shelters. Now, how did we do that? There were people saying, oh, we're kicking people out of shelters. No way, we didn't do that. Last year, our homeless system was able to house over 5,000 people into permanent housing. So our providers continued to do that during this time. So they were able to accelerate in some cases. In fact, the VA had one of its best months ever in moving veterans into permanent housing. So instead of booting anyone out, we didn't do that. We just accelerated on getting them moved into permanent housing. That was strategy number one, or action number one. Action number two was we used extra space that we had in some of our transitional shelters. Those are ones where people can stay up to 2 or even 3 years. We used extra space there to decompress. So some of the people in the emergency shelters were moved into vacancies in the transitional shelters. We had around 85 vacancies that we could better utilize. So those were our two main strategies. And then what we did is we brought on our new program, POST, which was an HPD Captain Mike Lambert creation. And that's the Provisional Outdoor Screening and Triage Facility. I'll show you some of those things in a moment. So we did the three things that are absolutely critical to address shelter capacity: house people faster, spread out the space, use other spaces that we had already available, and number three is create more capacity. And I think we did that really quickly. Post came online April 7th, Ka'ahi came online April 1, and then we already were decompressing in March. And then the final thing is this homeless prevention. So we encourage governor and mayor, and there was no difficulty in doing that, to suspend termination of leases, evictions, foreclosures. Some of that was done by the feds. So even Section 8, or what's properly called housing choice vouchers, you can't evict someone if you have a federal program. Even if you're a landlord and you have a Section 8 client, you can't. And quite frankly, in Hawaii, we've had very little issues on this. I mean, I think most people understand that. Now, it doesn't take care of the rent arrears, which is another thing we have to do. And we're looking at that, how we can help with that, and what's the appropriate way of addressing that. Because the landlords, many of them depend on the money coming in from rent to take care of themselves, especially the older members of our community. And then, of course, we're going to look at the strategic use of the CARES Act funds, that Congress passed. Honolulu received $387 million, and we've just received guidance. Actually, it was last week, Friday, and then we're looking at additional guidance right now, because it's money that basically has to be spent for things that are directly COVID-19 related between March 1 and December 30th. It's not just encumbering the money, it must be spent. So we have to make sure we can get the money out the door and into the hands of people who need it. So that's the overall strategy that we have. And I'm going to just go ahead and push on, and then we'll have time for questions through a number of these other slides, which kind of illustrate some of the things I've been talking about. So the Ka'ahi facility, that's the one that's also known as the Temporary Quarantine and Isolation Center. This is the one that we put up basically to help have a safe place for people that are being tested, waiting for test results, or, God forbid, should actually be diagnosed as COVID positive, to have a place to stay. So this 26-unit facility, Ka'ahi Street, basically we have room for 13 people for quarantine and 22 people in isolation, should that be necessary. The most we've had right now, I believe at any one time, was 7 people, maybe 9 at one time. That's it. Right now, as of yesterday, we have 3 people in the center awaiting test results. And that probably is down to 2 actually this morning. So this has been a really helpful piece to have. And then on our housing website, and I'll give you the link and show that to you later, we also have all the links to the flyer. We have a 1-page flyer that explains exactly what Ka'ahi is, and the Department of Health has a whole bunch of pages, 6-page handout that kind of details the decision-making process. But our 1-sheeter tells people how to get it, how to access it, what it's for. But basically, I explained that. Quarantine and isolation, homeless persons. Well, here we go. This is a picture of the inside of Ka'ahi. This is right across from IHS Women's and Family Shelter. And again, we are doing testing there for those who walk in and are screened and deemed as appropriate for testing. And then what we're trying to do is do a very, very strategic approach to this. So the Department of Health has this 3-prong approach, and it's outlined here. This is one part of it. Their strategy includes testing appropriately, especially in vulnerable communities, having a good approach when it comes to quarantining, focusing on the vulnerable populations, and then strong government directives on practicing what we now call physical distancing rather than social distancing. We don't want people to socially distant themselves. We want them to physically distance and hopefully stay in communications. So that's kind of where Ka'ahi is. Then this other one, which helped to expand our shelter capacity, is the post. And again, Captain Mike Lambert, HPD, came up with this idea. And this is a temporary resource. You can see the pictures of the tents. This is over at Keahi Lagoon Park. And what it's basically for is for those who can't access shelters because of capacity. And it's also a place where people who want to self-quarantine. Now, we use self-quarantine, but we don't mean it in the technical sense. These aren't people that have been tested. It's people that have been in an outdoor setting and who are uncomfortable. Like they wonder, just like the rest of us, you know, we've been told we have to stay at home. They don't have a place to stay at home that's safe. And we wanted to provide that for them. And so we provided this. They get to stay here for 15 days. They have showers, they have bathrooms, they have meals. They're medically screened every day for COVID. If someone coming in looks like they may have an illness or something, we've worked it out with Ka'ahi, again, Department of Health. They get transported up to Ka'ahi and further reviewed, and in some cases tested. So no one at the post has COVID-19 or is suspected. Once they are suspected, they get sent somewhere else for screening and appropriate testing. And so we also put into place appropriate physical distancing and hygiene practices. This has been a great program. Basically, and I can go into more detail if people are interested, the red site is where people go initially. Once they clear the 15 days, they go to a blue site. The blue site that we have right now is at Lehua Community Park, Pearl City area. This has been very helpful for people. Now, the way it works is a little explanation. We open up a red site. So we have 4 red sites at Keahi, and they take anywhere from 20 to 30 people. Now, it's been really interesting because a number of the people that have stayed has been really good. I mean, right now in both red and blue, we have around over 70 people in these. And someone has to be pretty serious about, you know, their health if they're willing to stay 15 days in quote unquote a lockdown setting. You know, they're not allowed to go in and out. So again, it's very much like any of us where we're really not supposed to be going in and out. You know, now that's starting to get relaxed. And the blue site allows for that. So they're there, they get the screenings, no ins and outs. And again, HPD has been running this, and it's been very successful. And I say successful, 2 things. Number one, people going in, but also already when people are in there, providers like IHS are working with them. So we've had a number of people, a dozen, that have actually left the site to go to shelter or to treatment. And I don't mean COVID-19 treatment, like detox treatment. And in our blue site, we had people go from there as well. And that's part of the whole system here, is kind of create a place where people can, you know, make sure they're okay. And that makes the providers more comfortable working with them in the shelters, and then gives them a way of meeting providers and then getting the care that they need. So when space opens up at a shelter that is appropriate, they can go there. If space opens up at a drug treatment program or a detox facility, they can go there as well. So this has been working nicely. The yellow site is a more open one. We're trying to get one started in Waianae. We hope to have that started in the next couple of weeks. So the other side is we suspended enforcements at first because CDC guidance, and remember it's only guidance, it has not the force of law. It is not regulatory in its impact. So, but we suspended enforcements at first, and then what we did is we looked at the situation, worked with our outreach providers, and in the encampments that we're willing to put into place and practice physical distancing, appropriate sanitation, they didn't block community access, you know, sidewalks and things like that, then we kind of let them go, to be frank. We left them alone because we can't deal with everything, so we at least had that in place. But last week, we started enforcements again because certain areas were out of control and presented a public health hazard both to those who were in those areas as well as to community. So not surprised, and we've been very public about this, by the way. We announced this to our providers so they could do extra outreach before we actually started the enforcement. So Dillingham near Costco Again, I went by there this morning. They're back there. We've started some additional enforcements. We're not going to let them stay there. Partly Hart is already starting work at night, so it's getting more dangerous. Mo'ili area, including Old Stadium Park, Kapahulu, including Crane Park, and Chinatown. So if you go to most of these areas, you already will see, significant improvement. Other encampments, like the one at Waimanalo, we've allowed to stay in place, working with them. It's not ideal, but again, right now we're in a crisis situation, so we've had to be a little bit more flexible and try to, look at things in a different light based on what is going to be in the best interest of the vulnerable populations' health and safety, as well as the larger communities' health and safety. We think all of that is really important to look at. The comfort stations, I mentioned this already. We distinguish two types of comfort stations that the city has: standalone ones and those that are attached to facilities. So the ones attached to facilities, like attached to a gym, and those were closed, and they still are in large part. But the standalone ones, those are open. They're not attached like a tennis court or to a gym facility. And like I said, some of those we've opened up to 24/7 operation. We're also deploying our hygiene trailers now more widely, because HPD got its own hygiene trailers in. We can use those for our post site, both the blue and the red sites, and then that allows the other hygiene trailers to kind of go around to other areas that have need and don't have access to comfort stations or showers. So a number of our facilities are closed down because of vandalism or severe maintenance needs. Like even at Kihei, we had to bring in porta potties and additional hygiene support because one of the comfort stations some months ago was burned out by vandalism by a fire. But we're trying to make sure these comfort stations are available. And now that we've opened up the comfort stations, the parks for exercise, we want the comfort stations obviously to be available, for people like me, okay? Not that I exercise, but whatever. Okay. And then I'm gonna move now to questions. Before I do that, I'm gonna stop sharing, but I wanna show one more thing. And I know there's some chat things. I wanna bring up our website. I'm gonna share that in a moment here. Just give me a second here to pull that up, because what we try to do with our website, okay, is make a lot of information and links. So one of the other things we've been pushing is our Everybody Counts, the census. So if you haven't filled out your census, please go ahead and do that. This is really important. So we have like all of our city web pages have links to all the information on COVID-19, as well as information, on the census, which is now uploading right now, or downloading, excuse me, the census brochure. My connection to VPN isn't the fastest here. Here you go. So we put this up so people understand, what's up with the census. And so we encourage people, again, if you haven't had the chance to do the census, please do that. So there's that. And then on the Office of Housing website, you'll see links. Like, for example, our schedule when we do stored property or sidewalk nuisance ordinance enforcements, we have the link for that right here. Always at least minimum of 24 hours or 3 o'clock the day before. So you see our schedule already for Monday. We try to make sure we do that. And then also what we do is we publish, working with the Partners in Care group, we publish shelter vacancies. So when people say we don't have shelter vacancies, that's simply not true. Every day we have 75 to 100 vacancies throughout the island, and that doesn't include the post site. So they try to keep this updated. So this was updated May 1st. And again, we're trying to be very transparent in terms of what we're showing. Now it doesn't have absolutely all the detail on the veterans, but it has most of the key ones. Oh yeah, it's broken up here. Veterans is up here in its own category. Because veterans, we always can house 25 to 30 veterans without any problem. And then we have links for everything else. Sometimes people want to know, where are all these homeless shelters and services? We have a Google map that puts all that right up at everyone's fingertips. And we try to keep it fairly updated, and you'll see it as it populates right here. And it's like shelters, service centers. We're even populating with our affordable housing projects. You can see a lot is in the urban core. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will go to the chat and see. Is that a good way, Naomi, to start? Use the chat questions first, or do you want me to do it in another way?
I think the chat is okay, so we can just open it up for questions. I'll unmute all. Any questions for Marc?
Marc, this is Alan Okinaka from Tila Bay.
Aloha.
Aloha. You know, one of the places that has an encampment is the harbor in Waianae.
Yes,
and
on
it
state
seems
property.
To be a very, yeah, it seems to be a very strong community effort there of homeless people. How does your program align with what they want to do as far as this COVID-19 goes and long-term homeless mitigation?
So first off, I am the mayor's representative for the Waianae Neighborhood Board. And so I deal with that community and the differing perspectives on that community. So just so I'm very clear, it's also a state property under the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So it's not our kuleana. I will be very frank, we would not allow such development, encampment. It has severe, from my perspective and a public health perspective, has some significant issues, besides the fact that it is the largest illegal encampment in the state. So I do not think, and I, you know, again, all due respect to others who think otherwise, I do not see it as a model. Now, that doesn't mean we're not working with them, because it's the state's kuleana. And so, for example, we work with them with the bathrooms over in Waianae near the tennis courts, you know, so that they are available to them, even though Harbors also has a set of bathrooms there. So from a humanitarian point of view, of course, we work with them, and we're very hopeful that they are in the process of gaining property in that area and building something that is legitimate. And of course, we will support that as a positive move forward. But as such, you know, that encampment, quite frankly, also is not that popular with the community over there as well, because they realize that it's getting special treatment and it has created other problems for the community as well. So that's my particular take on that. Again, very important. That's the state's kuleana. City would not allow that.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that it was a model for anything. I was just asking the question because I know it's a very strong encampment in Waianae. I've listened to board members from the Waianae Neighborhood Board, and they, you know, one side is supported because it provides a way for, especially the young kids, to have a stable family life, and the other people that don't want to see anything like that happening. So that's the reason I'm asking the question.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And, you know, again, on Oahu, family homelessness since 2015 has declined by 42% because of projects like Ka'awiki Village, a public-private partnership that Rotary has helped to support, because of Mayor Caldwell's initiative to focus on housing for 60% AMI and below. And we've been cranking out that at record numbers. We still need a lot more. We have around 1,150 on the books, breaking ground this year and coming online. So that's been our approach. You know, Mayor said again and again, the only permanent solution to homelessness is permanent housing with support services. So we don't want to see people in shacks or favela. We just don't, that's not okay, especially children. And so we've had a tremendous decline in homeless children. And that's because I think community members like Rotary have helped to step up and make that happen. So thank you. Doris, you're lighting up. Oh, okay.
Hi, Mark. I have a question. I live out in Makakilo, and we have a neighborhood park that every once in a while a homeless single or a couple people would come into, but all of a sudden there's a fast-growing encampment down there. What should someone do when they notice that?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So if you see anything that's a threat to public safety, of course you call 911. Either, it's like, for example, sometimes we have people witness bad domestic violence type of thing brewing or whatever, or a threat to the community, 911. Otherwise, the best thing to do is to go on it's complaints to the mayor or something like that. You can actually link to it from our housing website and do an online request to have that attended to. The reason why I say that is because once it goes in our system, anything around homelessness goes by me, goes by HPD, goes by, depending on what it is, Department of Facility Maintenance. The third option, which actually is even better because it really works now, is our 311 app. I don't know how many people have used it. We added a few months ago a category for homeless concerns. And the reason why the 311 app is on your phone, Android and as well as iOS. And you can take a picture if you want. And you can report anonymously if you want. And then once you do that, HPD reviews it. So those are the best ways because when we get pictures in an email, then it's easy for us to follow up. And then what we will do is we'll send outreach providers out there first. And depending on the situation, then we'll schedule an enforcement, stored property or sidewalk nuisance. Does that help?
That helps a lot. Mahalo.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have one question. How is the homelessness on Kauai being handled?
Oh, so I'm more focused on Oahu, so I don't know the Kauai situation. Kauai is very unique. They have a very small homeless population in comparison to, like Oahu. The mayor over there decided to allow people to stay on beaches and allow the encampments to stay there. But, they have a much smaller population, so every situation is a little bit different. And, I work with the Kauai people, and they've made, an assessment, a judgment that's appropriate for their setting right now during the COVID-19 crisis. But I know all of the counties, for example, all the housing directors, well, we were meeting monthly. We haven't been because of this COVID crisis. We all know that the way to solve it is through the permanent housing and support services. But right now we're doing all kinds of temporary things because the number one thing, like I said, is keep people healthy and safe and don't let community spread happen. But thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Dave Mosrin. I wanted to know what you folks are doing with regards to the news that homeless people are being flown into Hawaii. I know that they are being screened and some are being sent back, but is there any, do we have any recourse on that, as well as not just now for the COVID, but actually after COVID's done, to prevent more homeless people from being flying into Hawaii for haven?
Dave, that's a great question. So there are two pieces to that. Number one is the myth that goes around saying that municipalities are paying people to fly into Honolulu or Oahu. The only case we know of that was one with New York, one family. So that is not happening, or if it's happening, we haven't seen the documentation say that one case. However, we do know that homeless people have been flying in on cheap tickets. So again, being very transparent, our post, when it was opened up at first, we had 15 people within the first couple weeks who came to Hawaii within 5 days and were at post. Some came directly from the airport with suitcases in hand. We even had one agency, I'll leave it, I don't want to throw anyone under the bridge because we're all learning and we all make mistakes, okay? One agency that wanted to bring someone in from Kauai who had landed there and was homeless, wanted to fly them to Oahu so they could come stay at post. So this is an issue, and we have flagged it with the Department of Transportation, which is a state agency, to ascertain that anyone coming in has a place to stay for the quarantine requirement isn't coming in intentionally homeless, and that there's some enforcement and follow-up. So right now we're trying to encourage proof of concept on protocol while we have very few visitors. Like we've been getting, what, 500 visitors? You know, and we can get up to, and we've had trouble enforcing that with 500, you know, and not visitors. I think the visitor count's more like 160, but 500 people flying in instead of the 30,000 that we can have sometimes, right, in a given month. So your question is a really important one, and we're pushing it at the state level for them to address it. We also are trying to figure out what can we do. One of the reasons why I've always been against safe zones, so-called safe zones, is because I believe it creates ecotourism for the wrong clientele. And actually, one of the byproducts of this time has been to prove my thesis, because we have data showing that if we're not careful, people will fly in. I mean, when you can get an $80 ticket and you want it, what's your choice? Being homeless in California? Sorry, I'm not picking on California, pick somewhere else, okay? Or homeless in Hawaii? Are you kidding me? You saw how beautiful Kihei Lagoon is right on the beach, okay? So this is a concern, and it's a very good question, and I wish I had a definitive answer. We don't, but we're gonna push it. And I encourage you all to push it too. Thank you. Again, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, just trying to be as transparent as possible.
What is a safe zone?
Oh, so a safe zone basically is a sanctioned area where homeless people are allowed to stay. This has been a disaster everywhere on the continent where it's been done. It's been a disaster where it's been done here in Hawaii, for example, on Hawaii Island more recently, and Ala Park many years ago during the Fossey administration. And there's a good reason why it's a failure. It can't work. Because once you create a government sanctioned area, you must enforce the law. You can't say, oh, it's okay to drink and do drugs and, you know, do whatever you want in this area. You can't do that. Yet many of the people who insist on staying in an unsheltered setting are suffering from addiction as well as mental illness. And so creating a sanctioned safe zone has always been a disaster. Two reasons: you can't get the people that really need to be in there, and then security is a challenge. They tend to congregate around it. So that's why this kind of strategy doesn't work. And the third reason is usually they don't have an exit strategy. Like one of the things with our post program is we have an explicit exit strategy. You stay at post until the shelter is available, until we can get you into treatment or even permanent housing in some cases, or reunited with family. That's how our program works. So there's a clear exit strategy. So that's why, that's what a safe zone is, a sanctioned encampment. They're called by different names. Does that help on that? Okay. All right.
Marc, you had mentioned a lot of initiatives in Waimanalo, initiatives in town, and you even touched on, you know, the West Side. What initiatives are being taken on the North Shore for the homeless?
Good question. Sure. The North Shore is, we're working on doing, one of the other things that we do is called the HELP program. It's basically an interagency outreach program that HPD runs and coordinates, and we target or we prioritize certain areas, and we go out and we do outreach. And we've done a number of those in the North Shore and also Central Oahu. North Shore and Central Oahu don't have shelters. And the reason why is the community never wanted them. They were given the opportunity to have shelters back in 1997 under Governor Lingel's administration, chose not to go that way. Under Mayor Caldwell's administration, each district has had multiple times available up to $2 million to supplement any initiative. But these areas have chosen not to go with having shelters, which actually I think is actually not a bad idea, because you don't necessarily want to create more shelters because we have quite a few vacancies in ours. We have good flow. So I think primarily on the North Shore and Central Oahu, the focus has been more on outreach through providers like Alea Bridge and also providing hygiene services. It's been more, you know, in that regard, and working with community groups. But it's an area that does need more attention. That's one of the areas that we prioritize for our hygiene trailers, as long as they also have outreach providers with them. We don't want to just enable people to stay where they are. We want to encourage them. Okay, go ahead. Good question, thank you.
Are there any outreach trailers up there at this time?
No, not right. Well, not right now that I know on the schedule. None of them just stay up there, but the outreach providers are up there. Like Alea Bridge is a big one that does a lot of work on the North Shore and in central Oahu. IHS also has a contract for the North Shore area to do outreach, and they outreach all those areas regularly. When I say regularly, at least weekly, if not multiple times. And then the hygiene trailers, like for example, they were out in not Waialua, the other beach area there.
Wahiawa?
That's how I go to the. They were in Wahiawa, but also the other. Sorry,
Haleiwa. Mokulea.
Haleiwa. Yeah, that's it. Haleiwa. Sorry, yes, they were in Haleiwa area too. So, but there's none right now that's stationed out there.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much for, I mean, the amount of work you guys have been doing, and to be the first in the nation to have something of this kind is pretty impressive. And the map was really great that you shared too. Is there anything from a Rotary Club or individual opportunity for us to kind of get involved and support these initiatives?
Well, I think you folks have already been such a model. I used to be a Rotarian, and then I couldn't be very involved, and I felt bad, so I got out of it. Of course, Kathleen reminds me, and Naomi reminds me, you know, you do have an online club now, so maybe I don't have the same excuse, but I always feel like the backbone of Rotary is not going to meetings. The backbone of Rotary is being out in the community, doing projects and helping groups, which you folks do. I mean, like I said, Ka'awiki Village, you've been out there, and I know you've helped, like, you know, recently Ka'ahi, but many of you have helped like IHS over the years and Next Step. I mean, all over. So I always say the best thing people can do is connect with your local providers and help them. And you folks are already doing that. I mean, so I would just say keep up the good work. And also, if you have other ideas, please let me know, or, you know, or Scott Morishige at the state if you prefer. Like, I learned a lot about mental illness from Kathleen, and that has been very helpful. And in fact, I have a Po'okele intern for the city and an AmeriCorps Vista, and they're working on a film series right now. And one of the things in the first one that they're doing is 3 parts, 10 minutes each. They talk about, you know, mental illness in there. And, you know, so I think Rotary influences people not only by these projects, but by educating the community. So I just really encourage you to just continue doing more of that. We have, and some of you have seen our brochure. If you haven't, it's online. We take, again, a 5-pronged strategy for homelessness in general. It's around being a systems approach, so it's not working in isolation. It's about being data-driven. It's evidence-based. We use science, not emotion, to drive what we do. It's about housing, and it's about community engagement. That's our approach for homelessness as a city. And so I think Rotary does those things. So I wish I could say, do this, this, and this, but you have so many Rotary clubs and so many creative people. Just keep doing what you're doing and pushing us too, asking the right questions. And when we're not doing what we should be doing, say, hey, you know, take a look at this.
I think
Marc,
Dave Mostrin has his hand up.
Who does? I'm sorry.
Dave Mostrin?
Sorry, I already asked my question.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Marc, I know this is a crazy idea, and you might laugh at it, but when the Puna lava devastation occurred, they made a whole bunch of micro homes at a very low cost. And
yes.
I don't know, they're really small, but there were people could live in them. And
yes,
I thought, what if we took all our public comfort stations and we built a micro home right next to it to have 24-hour presence, such that you would reduce the vandalism and everything like that. I don't know how much the cost of repairing these places are, but the irritation of people not having a place to comfort themselves and everything could be prevented. I thought about that, and I know I don't know the financial break even, the cost of vandalism versus building a home and having somebody stay there. But that could be someplace that a person could, homeless person could stay in and have a sense of responsibility and helping to prevent future crimes.
No, I don't think that's a crazy idea at all. In fact, the tiny homes on Hawaii Island, I've actually encouraged some of our people here who are considering modulars like that. Excuse me, I just want to make sure I plug my computer in so I don't lose power here. I've actually suggested that they look at using those tiny homes instead of paying a Chinese company to build, modulars. Why not pay our Hawaii Island people to build these great tiny homes? And they are very good. And actually, it's interesting. Our building code here on Oahu allows for a lot of flexibility. So they actually could be adapted, from what I've been told, to fit our code. So that's actually, that's one thing. I actually encourage that on appropriate sites. The real issue for locating tiny homes is making sure they're not shacks, and these aren't shacks, okay? And number two, that you have water and sewage. That's the big. Electricity, we can do photovoltaic now, but water and sewage is a huge issue. Let me tell you, my biggest issue the past few weeks has all been around toilets and porta potties and whatever, okay? So it's a big issue. But that's number one. Number two is, in the old days, they used to have parks with resident managers, people that actually lived there. That was something they had in the old days, and especially on the Waianae coast. And so, but it was stopped, I guess, for all these liability and other kinds of reasons. In fact, one of the parks that I've been working on, Mauna Lahi Lahi Cultural Garden out in Waianae, used to have one apparently out there, and the communities talked about that. So no, I don't think, I think it's an idea, again, I'm not a parks person, I think it's an idea really worth pursuing, because there's nothing like physical presence. That is helpful, and when it's community buying in, it can be helpful. So I'm gonna follow up on that one. I put an exclamation point just because I'm kind of curious about that. Anyway, but thank you.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm at 12 noon. I don't want to go late. See, this time I didn't talk too much. I left more time for questions, Naomi and Kathleen. See, I know you're surprised. So.
And because we're the last one, you can go further. So if anybody else has questions, we can keep on going, because we've got an expert here.
Yeah, I did.
Well,
Are there what types of services are out in Waihiawa? Because we have there is a large encampment there, but also the community there has also kind of embraced the homeless encampment also.
Right. So again, that central Oahu area doesn't have a shelter. Alea Bridge is the main provider out there, and they're doing a very good job, and they're in the process of building out a center of some kind, and it'll be like a navigation center for that area. So my big advice, if you want to help out there, is to connect with Alea Bridge. Nikki Winter is the executive director. I think they're quite good. They're new org, but I think they're quite good, and they're one of our good partners that we work with. That's one thing. Number two is, I don't believe in supporting encampments. I think it's a bad idea to take food and supplies to homeless encampments unless you have an outreach provider, service provider with you. If you can use it as a carrot to build relationships so that people will avail themselves of services to move out, that's good. If all it does is keep people there, it's not so good. I deal with these situations in Waianae, for example. Again, I use a very concrete example because there's a lot of homeless communities out there, right? And I deal with the community complaints. So Keao Beach Park was one area. And I said to the community, they wanted us to do enforcements. I go, I'm not gonna do that out there unless you folks agree to help us. You've got to stop having people take food and supplies to people on the beach. That's why they stay there on the beach. A long time ago, when I first got started in a more concentrated way in this work, I used to ask homeless people that were in Waikiki, why do you stay there? And some of you have heard me tell this story. Kathleen and Naomi have heard me tell this story, sorry. It's not that I don't have other stories. It's just that this is a really good one because it's really true. And they looked at me like, are you stupid? Why wouldn't we stay here? People bring us food. There are jakes and showers here, toilets and showers. If we need cash, we can panhandle or dig for recyclables. And we have $1 million view. Why would we go anywhere else? So I told them, I said, if you're willing to work with us, stop enabling, then we'll go ahead and plan an enforcement in this area. And we did, and we were able to have positive events. Actually, Mount Alahi Lahi is a 13.5 acre cultural garden, and we largely cleared that because the community got the message. So that's the other side. I know some people don't like it when I talk like that, but I think it's really important. Main thing is connect with the provider. In that case, it's really mostly a lay a bridge. That's the main driver. I don't know if that helps, but the services, I want to make sure I'm clear. In Central Oahu and North Shore are weak. There's no doubt.
That really does happen. Thank you. I'll connect with them. I totally understand your viewpoint. I think that in Waihiwa, you know, Waihiwa is divided into lower and upper, which shows financial. But although I appreciate your views, I think it's another area that, although I don't live there anymore, I was raised there and born, and don't think that it is that the people there view it as enabling them. I think a lot of people have been in this situation and have gotten out, and I don't think there's a green line of people taking food down to the park where we all know where they live. I think it's more that we are aware of them and want services. And for instance, like we noticed there has been a homeless man who's lived there since I was in elementary, over 30 years. And nobody started noticing that he was showing up for a few days. The entire community went to go look out for him, to go find him. He was still alive, he was okay, did he need help? So you know, it's not directly that. And then on that note, is that then why we don't—
That's a good point. It's fair enough.
Yes, I think it's not exactly, you know, that straight that we all just enable. But on that note, is that why we don't see a lot of this homeless population in areas like Hawaii Kai or Kahala versus they, you know, popping up in areas like Waianae and Waimanalo?
Sure. So two things. First off, we do have, and I should have distinguished this, we have a special program in the city that we started last year called Outreach Navigation, which specifically focuses on those with mental health issues and addiction issues. So we have a special team contract that can take psychiatry to the street, and if needed, also provide legal support to get people through the assisted community treatment process. So, you know, there are those that are in that situation, okay? And that's different for sure. In terms of these other areas, well, I mean, again, let's be very transparent. The reason why these wealthier areas don't have it is because they don't tolerate it. They report it, and they won't allow groups to feed in certain parks in certain areas. Some of these areas have private security as well. We have some parks that have been adopted by certain communities, and those parks are kept clear because they have additional security that's paid for by the community. So there are a variety of reasons for that. And, you know, you touched on some of those.
Kind of to piggyback.
Oh, real quick too. The other reason you'll notice that, and it's I'm not sure a dog, pony, or, you know, tail or whatever. Most of our services are certain areas like urban core, right? And then even on the coast. So homeless communities tend to gravitate towards those, or we've established services where they tend to gravitate. I'm not sure which, right? Anyway, sorry, go ahead, someone.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that last question about the lack of noticeable homeless populations in those areas, it would seem that it is on the rise on the North Shore. Is there any studies or information like the point in time, the pit count, that shows that the homeless populations tend to be leaving these urban areas and are heading towards the North Shore communities where there are no services?
You know, that's a great question. So it's yes and no. If you look at over time, say a 10-year period where the distribution of unsheltered homelessness is, it's roughly always the same proportion from year to year. Overall, though, the unsheltered population has gone up over the past 10 years. We think with the new point in time count, it will stabilize. So on the one hand, the percentage of spread throughout the different districts has been the same. But because the overall number has gone up, that has driven the visibility of unsheltered homelessness up for sure. The North Shore is interesting. The reason why the biggest driver or predictor of homelessness is your unaffordable housing rate. And so as the North Shore has become a den for Airbnb and illegal vacation rentals, that drove a lot of people out from affordable housing. And so some of those people ended up becoming homeless. You'd be surprised at how many homeless persons are actually employed. They just don't make enough. And whereas before 4 people could share a house, a 2-bedroom or whatever, that house is no longer available in Haleiwa. Now, with our new short-term rental regulations, again, not everyone agrees with them. I tend to be a very big supporter, just so I'm, just transparent on that. That is starting to return some of the supply to the community. I think that's one of the reasons why in the point in time count that we took, we might see some stabilization, even if the overall number might go up slightly. Now, I think the next count, because of what's happening with the economy, is going to be a new world. Anyway, just some thoughts on that. So we do study that trend. I have 2 studies that are being done now by the University of Hawaii. When I say the city has funded 2 studies, we should get results soon. One is to look at the unsheltered homeless population and understand them better. We just don't understand them as well as we should, I think, so that we can develop more effective strategies. Number 2 study is to look at the inflow. As I said, last year we housed over 5,000 people in the permanent housing, yet we have still more and more homeless people coming into the system. We want to understand why. It's too simple to say housing is unaffordable. What else is going on? So we have the UH doing 2 studies for us to help us understand and then hopefully develop better strategies to address those concerns.
Okay.
One more question. How do you keep affordable housing affordable?
If I knew that, man, I would be mayor. Anyway, so there are first of all, there are no easy answers. Like anything else, there's no on any complicated issue, and this is a wicked issue, a wicked problem, classic, right? It's very complicated. There's no silver bullet, only silver BBs, as a colleague of mine said. So, and I say that, and I'm not trying to be flip, but there are a number of things that we do know. Number 1 is we need to build more housing for 60% AMI and below. That's the area of greatest need. All the studies show that. I don't need another study. We've done enough. We need to do it, which is what Mayor Caldwell has shifted us to doing. So we have 1,150 units on the books coming on the line, 60% AMI and below. We've never had that many, but it's not enough. Okay, that's number 1 we have to do. Number 2, and I believe we have to focus on rentals. There's some people that are much smarter on this than I do who say we shouldn't just focus on rentals. I think that should be the initial priority, not homes for purchase. Number 2 is we need to go after vacant units. We have 340,000 housing units on Oahu. Approximately 10%, 34,000 are vacant for one reason or another. Approximately 15 to 18,000 are what we call seasonal units. That means these units are not being rented out. They're not being Airbnb. They're just kept vacant so that someone can fly in and enjoy them, or family members can enjoy the housing unit. We need to get those units on the market. We estimate that we're short on Oahu, if I remember correctly, 9,400, just over 9,000 units of rental housing. Most of that is 60% AMI and below. If we could just return some of these short-term rentals, which make up that 34,000 figure, and some of these other seasonal units to the market, we could really turn our housing problem around, in my opinion. And then the other thing is we got to get away from the culture of the car. We've decoupled parking and housing in our new city projects. So you don't get parking when you get a housing project in the city, a housing unit. You pay extra if you're in the urban core. The idea being transportation adds 30 to 50% to a poor family's cost. So if you get rid of the car, you give them more money and you help to address our traffic and other issues. So those are a couple, there's a whole bunch of things that we can do, but we have to have the real community will, not political will, community will. Like the mayor and our Department of Planning and Permitting and TOD have been trying to get to the city to decouple parking and housing. We had a recent development. The developer said, no, I can't do that. I have to have parking be part of the package. And that just adds to the cost of housing. Every parking unit adds $40,000 to $80,000 to the cost of a housing unit. So once you eliminate parking, once you eliminate the cost of your transportation because of an individual car, you increase people's income and you decrease their expenses. Anyway, thank you. It's a hard
good.
one.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Kat, did you have a question? Kat?
I have so many questions. I am so grateful for your presentation. And whoa, there's so many things that Rotarians would love to help with if we knew specific strategic asks that we could like be almost like a tactical force to support your efforts, especially when it comes to cultural shifts. And I'm wondering what that ask might look like.
That's a great question, and I'm sorry we ran out of time and we can't answer that. No. So, you know, what I would suggest on that, no, that really is that's an excellent question. I mean, all these questions have been. You know, I would really suggest, I mean, if you want to pursue that, we can have a group take that offline and we can look at a more strategic approach, you know, for Rotary, because I believe Rotary can influence public policy. And I think now's the time. You know, we're going through this COVID crisis. Recovery is going to be 2, 3, 4 years. I don't think any of us think otherwise. This is the time to look at what we as a community and what Rotary specifically can do to help advocate for the right answers and solutions. I hesitate to give examples because, you know, right now we're in the midst of trying to figure it all out. But no, Kat, I mean, you know, Naomi, if you want to get a group together or whatever, I'm happy to be a part of that and bring in some other people to help have that conversation.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's an excellent suggestion, Naomi. You know, even our club, we're trying to find a way of establishing a homeless committee or a home project or something like that. But if we can have a district-wide effort of some kind to gather information or make suggestions or putting projects together, I think it will work well. And having Marc with his expertise, I think would be a really, really good effort for Rotary.
Yes, that's exactly what we wanted to start to do with these community issue sessions, is to get people who are interested in this, in the topic, and talk to each other statewide. And so we'll be sending out a survey. Well, we did send out one. We'll do it again, so we can find people who are interested in this one topic to be talking to each other and see what kind of projects or programs we can get involved with, and ask the question of what is needed and what impact can we make on projects. So if you are interested in serving on this committee, then just email me, but we'll get out the PowerPoint to everyone, and you can ask your questions of Marc too if you want to. But if we're done, Kathleen, do you have any other things that you want to say, Kathleen?
No, just other than a big thank you. I think that our district has been really generous in supporting homelessness, and people respond very quickly if there's a call, if there's a need. And so I think it's been great. And Marc, you're such a champion in this cause. Of course, Rotary misses you, but it's great to see you now. And it's great to always have you as a resource and a connection. So I just want to thank Marc and really everybody for always being so responsive. So I think it is down to those personal relationships. Many of you have great relationships with your local shelters. And so it's good to do it locally, but then I love the idea of kind of a statewide focus as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Naomi, for the invitation, and all of you for engaging on a Saturday morning. Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Mark.
See you.
Mahalo.
Aloha. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Alan, thank you. Great questions.
Both Allens.
Both Allens.